The dust storm had been raging for 3 days when the miners found it. Red sand whipped across the surface of Colony 7 like angry spirits, forcing everyone to stay inside the protective domes. Tony Rodriguez was checking the eastern perimeter sensors when his scanner picked up something massive moving near the old excavation site. At first he thought it was debris from the storm. Metal scraps and broken equipment often got thrown around during these weather events, but this signature was different. It had a heat pattern. It was alive. Tommy called it into base control. Within an hour, a small team had suited up and ventured out into the dying storm. What they found changed everything they thought they knew about the creatures that roamed the outer worlds. The thing was huge. 6 limbs spread across the rocky ground like a fallen giant. Its body stretched nearly 15 feet from head to tail, covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 4 arms ended in claws that could tear through steel, while 2 powerful legs were built for speed and jumping. The head was the most disturbing part. Multiple eyes arranged in a complex pattern, each one the size of a human fist. A mouth filled with teeth designed for ripping and tearing, but it was dying. Dark fluid leaked from wounds across its body. 1 arm hung at an impossible angle. The creature's breathing came in short, painful gasps. When the miners approached, it tried to raise its head but could barely manage the effort. Most of the team wanted to put it out of its misery right there. These were Ravenclaws, apex predators from the shadow worlds. Stories of their hunts had spread across human space for decades. Entire settlements had been wiped out when packs of these creatures decided to feed. They were living nightmares that haunted the outer rim, but Dr. Emma Collins saw something different. She knelt just outside the creature's reach and studied its eyes. There was intelligence there. Pain, yes, but also awareness. The creature was looking at her, really looking, not just seeing prey or threat. The debate lasted 20 minutes while the storm winds died down around them. Half the team argued for immediate termination. The other half wanted to study it from a safe distance. Emma wanted something else entirely. She wanted to help it. Captain Torres, the colony administrator, thought she had lost her mind. Ravenclaws were killing machines. This one might be wounded now, but what happened when it healed? What happened when its pack came looking for it? Emma pointed out that the creature had made no aggressive moves despite their presence. It could have attacked when they first approached. Even wounded, a Ravenclaw was dangerous enough to take down several humans before they could stop it. Instead, it just watched them with those strange, complex eyes. The argument might have continued for hours, but the creature made the decision for them. It tried to move away from the humans, dragging itself across the rocky ground with obvious pain, not toward them in attack, away from them. As if it understood that its presence put them in danger, that single gesture convinced Torres to give Emma a chance. They loaded the creature onto a heavy transport and brought it back to the colony's medical facility. The entire base was put on high alert. Armed guards stationed outside the quarantine bay. Emergency protocols activated. Emma worked alone with the creature for the first few hours. She had studied Ravenclaw physiology from recovered remains and video footage of attacks. Their biology was unlike anything else in known space. The multiple arms allowed them to attack from several angles at once. Their legs could propel them incredible distances in a single leap. Most disturbing of all were the eyes. Each one could focus independently, giving them complete awareness of their surroundings. But as Emma treated the wounds, she noticed something the textbooks had never mentioned. Patterns of light flickered across the creature's scales. Subtle bioluminescence that seemed to follow some kind of rhythm or code. When she cleaned a particularly painful wound, the lights flashed bright red. When she applied healing gel, they shifted to a softer blue. The creature was trying to communicate over the next few days. Emma established a basic understanding with her patient. Red meant pain or danger. Blue meant comfort or gratitude. Yellow indicated curiosity. Green showed contentment. The creature, which Emma had begun calling Shadow because of its light-absorbing scales, was far more intelligent than anyone had imagined. Shadow's story emerged slowly through their improvised light language. It had been part of a hunting pack that traveled between star systems, following migration patterns of prey species. But during their last hunt, Shadow had hesitated. The prey was a group of young creatures, barely old enough to be away from their parents. Something in Shadow had rebelled against killing them. That hesitation had cost the pack their hunt. In Ravenclaw society, failure meant exile or death. Shadow's packmates had beaten it severely and left it to die on Colony 7's surface. Among its own people, weakness was not tolerated. Mercy was seen as a fatal flaw. Emma found herself spending more and more time with Shadow. The creature's wounds healed quickly thanks to its advanced biology, but it seemed in no hurry to leave. When Emma entered the quarantine bay each morning, Shadow's scales would shift to warm yellows and greens. When she had to leave for other duties, they would fade to cooler blues. Other colonists remained suspicious. They had heard too many stories about Ravenclaw attacks. Even Torres worried about keeping such a dangerous predator so close to their families, but Emma saw something they missed. Shadow was not just healing from physical wounds. The creature had been cast out by its own kind for showing the very quality that humans valued most, compassion. By the end of the first week, Shadow could stand and move around the quarantine bay. Its strength was returning rapidly. Soon it would be healthy. Enough to leave if it chose to. Emma found herself dreading that moment. In Shadow, she had found not just a fascinating research subject, but something approaching a friend. She had no idea that their bond would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine, or that Shadow's choice between freedom and loyalty would reshape the relationship between their two species forever. 2 weeks had passed since Shadow's arrival when the first real breakthrough happened. Emma was reviewing data logs in the quarantine bay while Shadow rested in the corner. The creature had grown comfortable with her presence, often positioning itself where it could observe her work. Its scales would shift through gentle patterns of blue and green, creating an almost hypnotic display. Emma noticed that the light patterns weren't random. They followed specific sequences that repeated with slight variations. She began recording these displays, looking for meaning in the rhythms. What she discovered amazed her. Shadow wasn't just showing basic emotions through its bioluminescence. It was telling stories. The breakthrough came when Emma played back recordings of the light patterns at different speeds. Slowed down, she could see distinct sequences that seemed to represent different concepts. A rapid flicker of red and orange appeared whenever Shadow's patterns touched on memories of the hunt. Slower waves of blue and purple accompanied what seemed to be recollections of peaceful moments. Emma developed a simple response system using a handheld light device. She would flash specific colors and patterns, watching how Shadow reacted. Gradually, they built a shared vocabulary of meaning. It was crude compared to human language, but it was communication. Through these exchanges, Emma learned more about Ravenclaw society than any human had ever known. They were not mindless predators, as the stories suggested. They had culture, traditions, even something resembling art. The light patterns that played across their scales during hunts weren't just instinct. They were songs of victory, passed down through generations, but Shadow's songs were different now. The traditional patterns of dominance and conquest had been replaced by something gentler. When Emma asked why, Shadow's response was a complex swirl of colors that took her hours to interpret: loneliness, gratitude, confusion, hope. Shadow had never experienced kindness from another species. In its world, weakness meant death, and helping the weak was seen as weakness itself. Emma's care made no sense according to everything Shadow had been taught. Yet here it was, healing and growing stronger because a human had chosen compassion over fear. The more they communicated, the more Emma understood the depth of Shadow's exile. Ravenclaws lived in tight pack structures where every member had a role: hunters, trackers, scouts, guardians of the young. Shadow had been a lead hunter, respected for its skill and cunning. Its moment of mercy had not just cost its status. It had stripped away its entire identity. Emma found herself sharing details of her own life through their light language conversations. She told Shadow about growing up on Earth, about choosing to study alien biology, about the loneliness of frontier life. Shadow listened with focused attention, its multiple eyes tracking her movements and expressions. The creature seemed particularly fascinated by Emma's description of human families. The concept of caring for members who couldn't contribute to survival was alien to Ravenclaw thinking. When Emma explained how humans cared for their elderly, their sick, their young for years beyond necessity, Shadow's scales rippled with patterns she had never seen before. Wonder, admiration, something. That might have been envy. As Shadow's strength returned, it began moving around the quarantine bay with increasing confidence. Emma watched it test its healed limbs, stretch its powerful frame, practice movements that spoke of barely contained power. This was not a helpless creature anymore. Shadow could break through the containment barriers anytime it chose. The only thing keeping it here was choice. That realization both thrilled and terrified Emma. She had grown attached to Shadow in ways she hadn't expected. The creature's intelligence and emotional depth had shattered every assumption she'd held about its species. But Shadow was still a predator from a culture that valued strength above all else. What happened when it decided to return to its old life? The question became urgent when long-range sensors picked up ships approaching Colony 7, 3 vessels of unknown design, moving with purpose toward the settlement. Their energy signatures matched nothing in human databases, but their trajectory suggested they knew exactly where they were going. Captain Torres called an emergency meeting. The approaching ships would arrive within hours. Colony 7 had minimal defenses against a determined attack. If these were hostile forces, the settlement's 2,000 residents would be in serious danger. Emma's blood ran cold when she realized the timing wasn't coincidental. Somehow, Shadow's former packmates had tracked it to the colony. They were coming to finish what they had started in the wasteland. She rushed to the quarantine bay to find Shadow's scales blazing with agitated patterns of red and orange. The creature had sensed the approaching ships through means Emma didn't understand. Its multiple eyes were fixed on the ceiling, as if it could see through the metal and rock to the sky above. Using their light language, Emma asked Shadow about the ships. The response was immediate and terrifying. Shadow's packmates had come not just to reclaim their wayward member, but to eliminate the source of its corruption. In their view, Emma's compassion had weakened Shadow beyond redemption. The only solution was to destroy both the creature and its human influence. Emma tried to convince Shadow to hide, to let her tell the pack it had died from its injuries. But Shadow's response was firm. It would not let harm come to the settlement because of its presence. It would not let Emma suffer for the kindness she had shown. As the alien ships entered Colony 7's atmosphere, Shadow made a choice that surprised everyone who witnessed it. Instead of fleeing or hiding, the creature positioned itself at the colony's main entrance. Its scales shifted to patterns Emma recognized as challenge displays. War songs its people had sung for generations. Shadow was preparing to fight its former packmates not for dominance or territory, but for something entirely new in Ravenclaw culture. It was preparing to fight for love. Emma watched through the facility's cameras as 3 massive Ravenclaws emerged from their ships. Each one was larger than Shadow, their scales blazing with traditional hunting patterns. At their head walked a creature that dwarfed even its companions. This had to be the pack leader, come to judge Shadow's fate personally. The confrontation that followed would determine not just Shadow's future, but the future of human Ravenclaw relations throughout the galaxy. Emma could only watch and hope that the creature she had saved with compassion would find the strength to defend the compassion that had saved it. The pack leader's name was Talon, and he was everything Shadow had once aspired to become. Standing nearly 20 feet tall, his scales were scarred from countless battles and marked with the ritual patterns of a supreme hunter. His 4 arms moved with deadly grace, each claw having tasted the blood of 100 different species. When he spoke through the bioluminescent display across his carapace, his words carried the authority of absolute command. Talon's message was simple and brutal. Shadow had brought shame to their lineage by showing weakness to prey. The human settlement harbored a corrupted member of their pack. Both problems would be eliminated today. Emma watched from the colony's control center as the confrontation unfolded. The colonists had been evacuated to the deepest shelter levels, but she refused to leave. Shadow had stayed to protect them. She would not abandon the creature that had chosen their safety over its own freedom. Shadow's response to Talon's ultimatum came through patterns of light that Emma had never seen before. The colors were deeper, more complex, shifting between traditional Ravenclaw displays and something entirely new. Shadow was not just defying its former pack leader. It was challenging the very foundations of their culture. The conversation between the two creatures played out in rapid flashes of bioluminescence. Emma could follow only fragments through the light language she and Shadow had developed, but the meaning was clear enough. Talon demanded Shadow's return to proper behavior. Shadow refused. Talon threatened the human settlement. Shadow placed itself between the pack and the colony entrance. What followed was unlike any Ravenclaw confrontation in recorded history. Traditionally, pack disputes were settled through ritual combat. Strength determined leadership, and the weak or cast out or killed. But Shadow was not fighting for dominance over the pack. It was fighting for the right to protect something its people had no word for: innocence. The battle began with Talon's charge. His massive frame moved with surprising speed, forearms spread wide to prevent escape. Shadow met the attack head-on, but not in the way Talon expected. Instead of matching aggression with aggression, Shadow fought defensively. It dodged, redirected, and countered without seeking to deliver killing blows. Emma realized what Shadow was doing. It was fighting to subdue, not to destroy. Every move was calculated to disable rather than kill. This was not the way of the Ravenclaw hunter, and Talon's confusion was evident in the chaotic patterns flashing across his scales. The other pack members watched in stunned silence as their leader struggled against an opponent who refused to play by their rules. Shadow was physically smaller and less experienced, but it had learned something from its time with Emma. Sometimes the greatest strength came from knowing when not to use force. The fight moved across the colony's outer courtyard. Two massive predators locked in combat that shook the ground with each impact. Talon's claws left deep gouges in Shadow's scales, but Shadow's responses were precise strikes that targeted joints and pressure points. It was warfare as art, violence constrained by purpose. Emma found herself calling out warnings and encouragement through the comm system, even though she wasn't sure Shadow could hear her. But somehow the creature seemed to respond to her voice. When she warned of an attack from the left, Shadow would shift position. When she called for it to press an advantage, Shadow would advance. The pack members began to notice this interaction. Their scales flickered with patterns Emma recognized as confusion and disbelief. A Ravenclaw taking guidance from prey? Fighting to protect rather than conquer? These concepts violated everything they understood about strength and survival. As the battle wore on, Talon's movements became more desperate. He had expected to overwhelm Shadow quickly, to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Instead, he found himself matched by an opponent who fought with techniques he had never encountered. Shadow used Talon's aggression against him, turning the larger creature's strength into a liability. The turning point came when Talon, frustrated by Shadow's defensive tactics, made a wild grab for the colony entrance. If he could not defeat Shadow quickly, he would complete his original mission and eliminate the source of corruption. His claws extended toward the heavy doors that protected the colonists below. Shadow's response was immediate and devastating. The creature abandoned all restraint, launching itself at Talon with the full fury of a Ravenclaw warrior. But even in its rage, Shadow's attacks were aimed to cripple rather than kill. It wrapped its arms around Talon's throat, applying pressure. That would render the pack leader unconscious rather than dead. Talon struggled against the chokehold, his massive frame thrashing as oxygen was cut off to his brain. His pack members moved to intervene, but Shadow's warning displays stopped them. The light patterns blazing across its scales were unmistakably clear. Any interference would be met with lethal force. As Talon's movement slowed, Shadow had a choice that would define the future of both their species. Ravenclaw tradition demanded that defeated leaders die. Their society had no concept of mercy and victory. Shadow could complete its transformation by embracing human values, or return to the old ways and reclaim its place in the pack. Emma held her breath as Shadow looked directly at the control center cameras. Even through the electronic display, she could see the intelligence and conflict in those multiple eyes. This was not just a physical battle anymore. It was a choice between two different definitions of strength. Shadow made its decision. Instead of finishing Talon, it released the chokehold and stepped back. The pack leader collapsed to the ground, alive but defeated. Shadow's scales blazed with patterns that had never been seen in Ravenclaw culture before. Mercy and victory. Strength through compassion. The reaction from the pack members was immediate and chaotic. Some displayed confusion, others outrage. A few showed something that might have been curiosity. Their entire worldview had been challenged by Shadow's actions. If strength could show mercy, if protecting the weak was not weakness itself, then what did it mean to be Ravenclaw? As Talon slowly regained consciousness, Shadow positioned itself protectively between the fallen leader and the colony entrance. The message was clear: the humans were under its protection now. Any who wished to harm them would have to go through Shadow first, but the confrontation was far from over. Talon's defeat had shattered the pack's command structure, but it had also revealed something neither side had expected. Change was possible, even for a species that had remained unchanged for millennia. The question now was whether that change would bring growth or destruction to both their peoples. Talon rose slowly from the ground, his massive frame shaking with rage and confusion. In all his years as pack leader, he had never experienced defeat without death. The concept of surviving a loss was as alien to him as showing mercy to enemies. His scales flickered between traditional patterns of dominance and chaotic swirls that reflected his mental state. The other pack members maintained their distance, uncertain how to react to this unprecedented situation. Their leader lived but had been beaten. Their exiled packmates stood victorious but offered no killing blow. The natural order of their world had been turned upside down by a creature they considered weak and a species they viewed as prey, Shadow's light. Patterns remained steady and confident as it faced its former leader. Through the displays Emma had learned to read, she could see Shadow explaining its actions. The lights spoke of new understanding, of strength found in protection rather than destruction, of honor redefined through compassion. Talon's response was a mixture of fury and bewilderment. His bioluminescence blazed with traditional hunting songs, calling on ancient ways and time-tested truths. How could abandoning the path of the hunter be anything but weakness? How could protecting prey be considered strength? But Shadow had an answer that shocked everyone present. It gestured toward the colony entrance and began displaying patterns that told a story. The lights showed Emma's first approach to the wounded creature, her choice to heal rather than harm, her persistence. In the face of fear and opposition, Shadow painted a picture of strength that came not from domination but from choosing the harder path of caring. Emma watched through the cameras as Shadow's narrative continued. The creature described its own transformation, the growth it had experienced through kindness, the power it had found in having something worth protecting beyond its own survival. These were concepts that had no equivalent in Ravenclaw culture, yet Shadow made them real through the poetry of Light, one of the younger pack members. A creature Emma mentally dubbed Swift for its rapid movements began displaying patterns of curiosity. Its lights asked questions about Shadow's experiences, sought understanding of these strange new ideas. The response was immediate censure from Talon, whose angry displays demanded absolute loyalty to traditional ways, but doubt had been planted. Other pack members began showing subtle signs of interest in Shadow's words. They had all felt the emptiness of endless hunting, the hollow victory of conquest without purpose. Shadow offered something different, meaning beyond mere survival. The philosophical debate might have continued for hours, but it was interrupted by an unexpected development. Colony 7's defense systems. Automated protocols designed to protect against hostile wildlife suddenly activated in response to the Ravenclaw presence. Weapon turrets emerged from hidden positions and began targeting the alien visitors. Emma's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. The defensive AI had been programmed to recognize Ravenclaws as extreme threats. It couldn't distinguish between hostile pack members and Shadow, who had become the colony's protector. In the system's simple logic, all Ravenclaws were enemies. To be eliminated, the first energy blast struck the ground near Swift, who leaped back with startled alarm. More turrets came online, their targeting systems locking onto each of the creatures. Within moments, the courtyard would become a killing field that would destroy any chance of peaceful resolution. Shadow's reaction was immediate and decisive. Instead of using the chaos to eliminate its rivals, the creature threw itself between the weapon systems and the pack members. Energy blasts meant for Talon and the others struck Shadow instead, burning deep wounds across its scales. Emma screamed Shadow's name through the CUM system as she frantically tried to override the defense protocols. But the AI had entered combat mode and wouldn't respond to manual commands. It would continue firing until all detected Ravenclaws were eliminated or driven away. What happened next would be remembered by both species as the moment everything changed. Talon, seeing Shadow wounded while protecting the very packmates who had come to kill it, experienced something unprecedented in his existence. For the first time in his life, he understood what Shadow had been trying to tell them. Strength wasn't about who could kill most effectively. It was about what you chose to die for. The massive pack leader threw himself toward the nearest weapon turret, using his great bulk to shield Shadow from further harm. His claws tore into the automated gun, ripping it apart with savage efficiency. His light patterns blazed with new purpose as he called to his packmates. One by one, the other Ravenclaws joined the fight against the defense systems. They moved with coordinated precision, destroying turrets and disrupting targeting sensors. But they weren't fighting to conquer the colony. They were fighting to protect it, following Shadow's example of choosing to guard rather than destroy. Emma finally managed to override the AI protocols, shutting down the remaining weapons just as the last turret fell silent. The courtyard was filled with smoke and debris, but all the Ravenclaws were alive. More importantly, they were alive because they had chosen to protect each other instead of pursuing individual survival. Talon approached Shadow, who was badly wounded but still conscious. The Great Leader's light patterns were unlike anything Emma had ever seen from a Ravenclaw. They spoke of acknowledgement, of understanding, of something that might have been respect. Through displays of incredible complexity, Talon admitted that Shadow had found a strength greater than traditional power. The pack's reaction to their leaders' transformation was mixed. Some embraced the new philosophy immediately, their scales shifting to patterns that mimicked Shadow's protective displays. Others remained uncertain, caught between old ways and new possibilities. A few showed outright rejection, their lights calling for a return to familiar hunting grounds and simple truths. Shadow's response addressed each group with wisdom Emma hadn't known it possessed. To those who embraced change, it offered guidance and partnership. To those who were uncertain, it showed patience and understanding. To those who rejected the new path entirely, it offered something revolutionary: freedom to choose their own way without persecution. As the wounded creature struggled to its feet, Emma made a decision that would echo through history. She emerged from the colony's safety and walked into the courtyard where massive predators waited. Every human instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew this moment required courage that matched Shadow's sacrifice. She approached Shadow with medical supplies, tending to the creature's wounds while surrounded by beings that could kill her with casual ease. Her actions spoke louder than any words or light displays. Here was trust made manifest, compassion offered without guarantee of safety. The pack members watched in fascination as Emma worked. They saw Shadow's protective response to her presence, the gentle patterns that played across its scales when she touched wounded areas. They witnessed genuine affection between predator and prey, hunter and healed. By the time Emma finished treating Shadow's injuries, something unprecedented had occurred. A pack of Ravenclaws had witnessed mercy experienced. protection, and seen strength redefined through compassion. Some would return to the old ways, but others would carry this new understanding to distant worlds. The foundation had been laid for an alliance that neither species could have imagined. But the true test would come in the choices each individual made about how to live with this new knowledge. 3 months after the confrontation that changed everything, Colony 7 had become something unprecedented in human space, a mixed settlement where humans and Ravenclaws lived and worked together. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate, but it had been remarkable. Emma stood in the newly constructed research facility, watching through reinforced windows as human children played alongside young Ravenclaws in the compound's central courtyard. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just a few months ago, but now it seemed as natural as sunrise. Shadow moved through the play area with gentle grace, its massive frame somehow managing not to intimidate the smaller beings around it. The creature's scales displayed soft patterns of contentment and joy, colors that had never been documented in Ravenclaw behavior studies. When a human child stumbled, Shadow was there to steady them. When a Ravenclaw youngling became too aggressive in play, Shadow intervened with firm but kind correction. The transformation had begun immediately after Talon's acknowledgement of Shadow's new philosophy. 3 of the pack members had chosen to remain at Colony 7, curious about this different way of existing. Talon himself had returned to space, but not to resume old hunting patterns. Instead, he had become a messenger, carrying word of what he had witnessed to other packs across the galaxy. The results had been extraordinary. Within weeks, other Ravenclaws began arriving at human settlements throughout the frontier, not as conquerors or hunters, but as seekers wanting to understand this new form of strength. Most were rejected or driven away by fearful colonists, but a few found acceptance. Each successful integration made the next one slightly easier. Emma had documented every stage of the process. Her research notes filled dozens of files with observations about Ravenclaw psychology, social structure, and capacity for change. But the most important discoveries couldn't be measured or quantified. They lived in the bonds forming between species that had been enemies for generations. Shadow had become something entirely new in both human and Ravenclaw culture. The creatures that stayed at Colony 7 had begun calling it Packheart, a term that roughly translated to one who protects the family group. Humans had their own name for Shadow's role, Guardian. The distinction was crucial. Shadow wasn't a pet or a servant, as some observers suggested. It was a partner who had chosen to dedicate its considerable abilities to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The relationship between Shadow and Emma had evolved far beyond simple friendship into something resembling family bonds. Captain Torres had initially worried about having apex predators living among the colonists, but those fears had proven groundless. The Ravenclaws who embraced Shadow's philosophy became the most effective protectors the colony had ever known. Their enhanced senses detected threats hours before human technology could register them. Their combat skills made the settlement nearly impregnable against hostile forces, but the real security came from trust. The Ravenclaws had found purpose in protection, while the humans had discovered allies in the most unlikely places. Children who had grown up fearing monster stories now learned to read the light patterns that showed Ravenclaw emotions. Adults who had once seen only killing machines now recognized individuals with personalities, preferences, and genuine affection. For their adopted human families, not every integration attempt succeeded. Some Ravenclaws couldn't adapt to the emotional complexity of interspecies bonding. Some humans remained too frightened to accept former predators as neighbors. But enough succeeded to prove that change was possible for both species. Emma's work had attracted attention from the highest levels of human government and military command. Researchers, diplomats, and strategic planners wanted to understand how she had achieved the impossible. The demand for her expertise was overwhelming, but she rarely left Colony 7. Her place was here. With Shadow and the community they had built together, Shadow's own evolution continued daily. The creature had developed new light patterns that had no equivalent in traditional Ravenclaw communication. It created displays of pure beauty, abstract art that seemed to capture emotions too complex for simple color codes. Human children would spend hours watching these light shows, while Ravenclaw youngsters learned to appreciate aesthetics beyond the functional patterns of hunt and survival. The most profound change came in Shadow's relationship with Emma. The creature had begun displaying patterns that human linguists finally identified as a form of devotion previously unknown in Ravenclaw culture. Not the pack loyalty of traditional society, but something deeper and more personal. Shadow had chosen Emma not just as a protected individual, but as the center of its new understanding of purpose and meaning. Emma reciprocated with her own form of dedication. She had turned down lucrative research positions on core worlds to remain at Shadow's side. When military leaders suggested separating them for security reasons, she threatened to resign from her research posts entirely. Their bond had become the foundation upon which human Ravenclaw cooperation was built. The evening routine had become sacred to both of them. As Colony 7 settled into night cycles, Emma would sit in the research facility's observation dome while Shadow positioned itself nearby. They would communicate through their shared light language, discussing the day's events, sharing stories, or simply enjoying comfortable silence together. Tonight was different. Long-range sensors had detected another group of ships approaching, but these weren't Ravenclaws. The energy signatures suggested a fleet of human vessels, possibly military in nature. Word of Colony 7's success had spread, bringing attention that wasn't always welcome. Emma and Shadow stood together on the colony's observation deck, watching distant lights grow brighter against the starfield. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had everything else. Together, Shadow's scales shifted to patterns Emma had learned meant curiosity mixed with determination. The creature was asking if she was ready for whatever challenges these new arrivals might bring. Emma's answer came not in words or light displays, but in action. She placed her hand on Shadow's massive arm, feeling the warmth and strength beneath the dark scales. The gesture was answer enough. The predator that had once been pitied for its weakness had become the guardian of human dreams. The human who had shown mercy to a dying enemy had gained a protector whose loyalty transcended species boundaries. Together, they had proven that compassion could transform even the fiercest hearts. As the approaching ships drew closer, Shadow's light patterns blazed with protective determination. Whatever threats these newcomers might represent, they would find Colony 7 defended by bonds stronger than fear, loyalty deeper than instinct, and love that knew no boundaries between species. The galaxy was changing, one act of kindness at a time. And at the heart of that change stood an unlikely pair, a human scientist and her Ravenclaw guardian, proving that mercy was indeed the greatest strength of all.